Hello, and welcome to the 6th episode of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop.
And today we are talking about the 5th chapter of Anthony Kenny's A History of Western Philosophy, and that is How Things Happen, Physics. What did you think of this chapter?
It was good. It was good. I thought he explained Aristotle's theories in depth.
Yes.
I don't think he had to go in that kind of depth, but I understand it's historically significant, so I guess it's good to learn what he said in detail. Mm-hmm. Although I was wondering, when is this going to end? And move on to the next people. Mm-hmm. I was more interested in the Stoics.
Yes.
And their concept of basically fatalism or determinism.
Yes, that was interesting.
It was interesting.
But to get there, let's first talk about Aristotle and the continuum.
Sounds like a movie.
I'm sure it is.
The continuum.
Wait, how'd you pronounce it?
The continuum.
Okay, you said it weird. But,
thank you.
So the continuum is kind of like the fundamental principle of Aristotle's physics, kind of, because he kind of frames everything around what is divisible and when things like start and end, basically, and that's how his whole physics, his understanding of the world happens. And he says that there's 3 relationships between quantified items, and those are successive, and they have nothing of their same substance between them. So, like, between me and you, we are... I would say that we are successive because there's a bed in between me and you, so there's nothing of our same substance in between us. And then adjacent is that 2 boundaries are in contact with each other, and then continuous is that there is only one common boundary between the 2 things, and so they are continuous. If that makes any sense.
That's a good explanation of his terms. I think he had to kind of define different things as we go forward in Aristotle. So it's more of a discussion of linguistics than actual philosophy as I view it. But please continue.
Yes.
You're doing an excellent job.
Oh, thank you. And so he kind of breaks down divisibility. Divisibility is another big portion of his physical understanding. And he
I don't know why do you think he had such a prominent role?
Divisibility?
Yes.
Well, because you have to first define, what the smallest unit is before you can kind of talk about anything in physics. Because your rules kind of have to apply for everything.
Yeah, all right.
So it has to start from the smallest unit.
That's a good explanation. Thank you.
And so he says that divisibility can't be infinite, because if you keep dividing things, you get into basically what is a single point. And a single point in any space can't build on top of each other, and so nothing can really happen if you have infinite divisibility. So he kind of argues that there is no infinite divisibility, and that's kind of furthering the idea of atoms, and that there's a certain smallness, there's a certain limit to how small we can go, and there's a certain limit to how much we can break things down, and that is the atom.
Kind of a discussion of the theoretical or like geometric concept of point, of a point not having mass, and doing those mathematical equations versus what we really have in our physical reality, which means everything has to have some sort of space.
Yes.
Interesting.
There's not much else to say on the continuum. Those are kind of just his basic principles of physics, and he gets more in depth as we go along. And that's when he talks about place, which is kind of similar to what you were saying about a point, and how he defines place. I thought was pretty interesting. And he says place is the first motionless boundary of whatever is containing an object. And so his idea of place is always relevant to something else. So he kind of says the place that that like water is in, its place is within the steel boundary of the cup. And that is the place that it is in, because the cup is motionless in relation to the water inside of the cup.
Yes.
Yes. You're not saying much.
I literally didn't make any notations on Aristotle's discussion of place, other than I underlined the word place.
Place. Yes. Well, I just kind of want to talk a little bit more about it. He kind of always relative to other things. And so really we can kind of like expand, where I'm at right now. I'm at our house in Missouri, in the United States, in the planet Earth, within the solar system. And then eventually we make our way up to the universe. And I thought it was really interesting, his idea of the universe, because the universe is not in any place. Because his whole definition of place is relative to everything else. Like a river is in the place of where its solid, non-moving boundaries are, the riverbanks. And so the universe cannot be in any place because there is nothing relative to the universe except for what is within it.
Right. there's nothing, no reference point to the universe because it is everything.
It is.
Yeah,
I just thought that was an interesting way of framing things.
True, I should have pointed that out when I was taking my notes.
Yes, you should have. And so then he talks about motion. And motion...
emotion and motion?
Just motion.
Oh, okay, no emotions today.
Yes. Right. And so this is kind of the second time emotion has been brought up on the podcast. The first was with Zeno of Elea, I think. Because he was the guy who said that motion doesn't exist ever. Do you remember that?
I don't.
That was a couple episodes ago.
Why did he say that?
Because in order for me to get to you, first I have to move halfway,
right.
and I have to get halfway to there, and so nothing really moves ever. And I thought that was just kind of stupid.
Yes, it was absurd.
Yes, it was absurd.
But clever in its own weird way. Yes.
Yes.
I think Aristotle would disagree with him. There is motion.
Yes. And motion,
but again, it's a kind of relevant or always defined by its relation to other things, right?
It's always defined by potentiality. And he kind of defines it, point A and point B. So if I'm at point A and I want to get to you as in point B, I have the potential to either be at point B or to be heading to point B right now. And so motion is one of those continua, a constant thing, because just a series of successive places between me and you, that is not motion. Like if I stopped halfway in between the bed, that is not the motion of me coming to you. That is me moving to halfway in between the bed. And so motion has to be a continuous thing, because if you stop it, it becomes a lesser form of motion, kind of.
Are you also going to discuss how the Greek language didn't really have the correct tenses to discuss motion? I was reading out that Adam's gonna talk about that.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts about that? It's kind of interesting.
I think it's
like they didn't have the grammatical term for like moving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's like just the present tense. It was used all the time, and there's nothing to denote what is currently happening. And so it kind of frames it like in English we say he runs, and there's no definite time when he runs. Basically, it's kind of like the ability to run almost. But if I say he is running, we know that he is running specifically right now. And Greek really only has that first present tense, and so you cannot say he is running in any form. You just say he runs, and so it kind of has to go. Aristotle had to go like at lengths to define like he runs now, he runs at this time to define his motion, because he could not just say he is running and use that to define motion, because it would just be completely lost on the ancient Greeks, because there's just no way to understand that.
That just is interesting how the language has affected the philosophy in his discussion of motion. That he had to spend a lot of time trying to explain a concept that we just take for granted because of the language.
And he also kind of broke down like two different types of motion in a way. He defines like the difference between motion and actuality in terms of kinesis and energia. And kinesis is like a particular action. So if I am building a house, or if I am moving to this particular location, that is kinesis, that is motion. And that is different from energia, which is just like the feeling of being happy and that sort of thing. And he kind of, I don't know if it's discussed. It is discussed here. So it's like it's the difference between like knowledge and learning. Like, because you can interrupt learning. Like if I'm learning about something, you can interrupt me. I can stop learning. But if I know something and I have knowledge, you cannot interrupt knowledge. And so that would be an energia, while learning would be kinesis.
Fascinating.
Yes, fascinating distinctions there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So now the one I think you're most interested about, Aristotle on time.
Yes.
So we're going to have this discussion all over again.
Well, we don't have to.
No.
But he has an interesting discussion of the temporal order.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about the ultimate spatial ordering and stretches of motion, all that stuff.
Yes.
So do you want to give the synopsis of Aristotle's view on time, the concept of time?
Mm-hmm. And so this is another one of the fundamental continua. So time is always a constant thing. Time never stops. And so time is always defined by the number of motion in respect of before and after, which is kind of a weird little complex definition, but it's easier to kind of visualize, like if we think of an hourglass, which may have been what they were looking at way back then, because you can define time by the amount of grains of sand that have moved before they started moving and after they started moving.
Would they have had clocks at this point in
I
history?
think just sundials.
Sundials?
Sundials. No,
And,
not like analog clocks, I don't think.
Like nothing gear driven.
I don't know.
So?
Maybe.
I don't know.
I feel like Archimedes would have done something like that.
I
don't know.
Pretty clever cat.
I don't know the history of clocks.
I don't know the history of clocks. If we ever have a shop,
yes,
we'll have to name it like the history of clocks. If we ever have, like we have clocks, a clock seller should have a history of clocks or some sort of history reference. Those things. So you got to be a clever turn of phrase there.
All right. And so he kind of goes on to talk about, what is the present, and he says like where there is no motion, there is no time. And he talks about the now, and the now is an instant. It's an undefinable, basically unit of time. It is, just the immediacy. It is an instant, and you can't really, and it's kind of hard to explain because it's just, it's nothing more than that. It is an instant in time.
It's kind of similar to the point being outside of mass.
Yes.
But I thought it was interesting how he described an instant, like the present tense, as being without motion, which I think is probably almost a perfect way to look at it.
Yeah.
If you were to freeze time, it means that nothing would move or age or whatever, but I think age would imply movement. So I thought that was kind of an interesting...
Because you kind of think that would like kind of ruin his definition of motion because of like the whole potentiality and things. But then he kind of describes, well, nothing can happen in an instant.
Right.
And so that's why the now, doesn't ruin his definition of motion because, motion being continuous, you can't do anything in an instant. It just nothing happens. And I just thought that was interesting that it doesn't completely break his earlier definitions.
Yeah.
So what else do you want to say about time?
Well, I was just thinking if he's right, that instant, like that nothing can happen outside of actual passage of time, kind of affects the ability of someone or some entity to exist or to cause anything outside of time.
Yes.
So you could be, if you're outside of time, then you are outside of motion or effect. You couldn't be a cause.
Well.
Or could you feel an effect if you were outside of time? Or if you only live in the instant?
Well, if we're talking about causes, then we should probably move on to the next section.
Okay.
And read a little bit about what Aristotle has to say about causation and change.
Agreed. Go.
All right, so there's 4 types of causes, and I think we mentioned this way back.
According to Aristotle.
According to Aristotle, yes. And there's, of which and out of which an object is made. That is the material cause. So basically, what is what an object is constituted of? Made up of?
Yes.
Yes. Then it is its form and pattern, which is its the formal cause. So kind of like how it's constructed, not like actually the action of constructing it, but how it's made up. Not the materials, but like the order in which those materials go in. Then they have like the origin of a change or state of rest. And that's kind of the efficient cause, how it's actually made, what actually causes something to do that. It's like the action. And then it's...
I think that term is still used as the efficient cause of things, but...
Maybe. And then there's the final cause, which is just the end or goal of why a thing happens or is made.
Right. The efficient cause, I don't know if I've used that term, but I think that's like the primary or the most recent force that caused something to do something. Yes. Efficient cause, right? All right.
And then there's change, and there's 2 types of change. Something can grow. There's the growth change, and that is just a change in quantity. And there is alteration, that is a change in quality. So something can become larger, that is growth. It can become smaller, that's also growth. It's just negative growth. And then if it changes color or changes texture, I guess, that would be an alteration.
Yeah.
And then
it's kind of interesting how he categorizes those.
Then the Stoics on causality.
Stoics.
Yes.
Those are bad dudes.
Bad dudes?
Or good dudes. What? I thought you didn't like the Stoics.
No, I think the Stoics are the best school of thought in ancient Greece.
Which ones didn't you like
Skeptics.
last time? Oh, skeptics.
Skeptics.
Oh, yeah, because they didn't believe in anything.
God.
But the Stoics aren't the Stoics advocates for determinism?
They are, and I disagree with them.
Oh.
Yes. We can talk about that in a minute, because I want to talk about, just really quick, just to kind of go
about
through
the Stoics, or were you still on Aristotle?
The Stoics.
Yes, the Stoics.
And I kind of want to draw that back to our discussion of God and time.
Here it comes.
Yes. And so they kind of analyze causality. I'm just going to say this quote here, that the Stoics say that every cause is a body that becomes for another body a cause of something non-bodily. For instance, a scalpel, which is a body, becomes for the flesh another body, a cause of the non-bodily predicate being cut. Again, a fire, which is a body, becomes for the wood another body, a cause of the non-bodily predicate being burnt.
So that's clear as crystal clear as it could be.
Yes.
So what do they mean by that? What do you think they mean by that?
So what they mean is that when you have two things acting upon each other, one being the cause of something else, like I'm just going to reuse their example of a scalpel and flesh. So the scalpel is a thing, flesh is another thing. The scalpel kind of divides the flesh, creating this cause of being cut. And that's how I would break it down.
Very well.
Yes. And they also define joint causes and auxiliary causes, and they kind of say joint causes are two oxen pulling a cart. If the job can't be done without the other, that is a joint cause. And then an auxiliary cause is if I help you pick something up, but you could have done it on your own with a little more work. That's an auxiliary cause. Just another slight definition there. Yeah. And then sustaining causes. That's what I want to talk about because those are necessary for existence, and those never end. They are continuous. Basically the fundamental cause of everything, and they are always present and can never change.
Give me an example.
Let's see what the Stoics say. I don't know. I don't really like their examples here, but I would say like gravity. I would say that is a sustaining cause because that's something that never ends.
What about me being your father? Is that a sustaining cause? Once you exist, once I've created you, you exist.
Yes, you'll always be my father. I think that's a sustaining cause. But I kind of look at it at gravity because, even in an instant, gravity is still happening. Because, if I pause time for an instant, everybody wouldn't immediately float up for that instant because gravity is still acting upon everything. And I'd say that is a sustaining cause.
Would gravity be acting upon everything in that instant? Wouldn't the pull of gravity be suspended?
Why?
Well, how could it be pulling if there is no time to pull?
Well, then how could it not pull if there's no time for it to stop pulling?
That's right. It's neither pulling nor not pulling. It's an instant. You have not moved.
Yes.
You've not been pulled. You've not been pushed.
Yes.
So gravity in an instant being outside of time, it's just instant.
Yes.
There's no gravity. It's not pulling me anywhere.
But
if I jumped up in the air, the instant I'm at the peak, or even if I'm falling down, in that instant, gravity's not pulling me that instant.
But in the next instant, it is still happening because it doesn't just cease to exist just because you have stopped time. I would say because as soon as you're past that instant, it's still going.
Yeah, once you're past the instant.
Yes.
Yeah, once you're back in time, it's pulling.
So that's, I worded it because I had the thought there and then I worded it badly because, the gravity doesn't stop happening ever. Right? In that instant, you can look at things, you could say, well, that person is not being affected by gravity. But then you look at the next instant and they'll be slightly lower to the ground. Let's say they're falling. And you would say, well, gravity still has to be happening because in between that last instant and this instant now, they have moved. And so gravity still has to be acting in between those instants.
In between the instants.
Yes.
That's correct.
And so that's kind of...
during.
That's how I would look at God because even though if we look at an instant, if we look at something outside of time, it doesn't appear that gravity is working. It wouldn't appear that God would have, kind of a constant effect. But as soon as we look at the next instant, they have moved.
Okay.
And so it has to be a sustaining cause.
So you seem to be referring to God.
Yes, I'm going back to our little discussion.
But how is any of this relevant to a discussion of God?
Because I would say that because God is outside of time, almost like an instant.
Right, got it.
And so if we're looking at God as being outside of time, and we kind of look at God as a sustaining cause, kind of the first cause, the common cause for everything.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So then if gravity doesn't stop in between instants, an instants are outside of time, then why should God, stop being outside of time? Why should God stop having an effect if he is outside of time?
I don't think necessarily God can't have an effect. I've never espoused that.
Yes.
The question is whether he does.
Well, I would say that he does.
Okay. Well, then what in what way?
Well, this all goes back to determinism, I guess, and fate.
No, that's kind of a separate thing.
Well,
the first question I have is whether or not God takes an active participatory role in our lives.
I would say maybe.
Maybe.
Well, that's kind of why I'd like to. That's kind of why I like to look at it.
Cowardly philosopher's favorite word.
Yeah, that's kind of why I look.
Perhaps.
That's kind of why I want to look at it as a sustaining cause, because a sustaining cause, I wouldn't say it's either active or passive. I guess it is just something that always is.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so I should say that God has a sustaining effect on our lives.
So that's the first discussion, is whether or not he takes an active role, which is kind of interesting in some ways academic, as far as what God does and what God doesn't do, and whether or not that could either be good or bad. Mm-hmm. The other issue, which I think is separate, is which is the discussion we had before, mm-hmm. is whether or not we have free will.
If God knows everything.
Right. Mm-hmm. If it's already been known what we're going to do, whether or not that provides us with meaningful free will. And I, on the one hand, I think, well, it doesn't matter if he knows it. The mm-hmm. question is whether I know it.
Yes.
In a way, because if I know all of the things that are going to happen, and they're going to happen no matter what, the way I know it's going to happen, do I really have free will? But I guess if you have an outside observer, whether God or somebody else, let's say somebody else, not God, knows everything, like what's that character's name in the Marvel movies, the Doctor Strangelove or whatever his name is, with the time little Endgame. He says, I look forward in time and I saw not Doctor Strangelove, of course.
Doctor Strange.
Doctor Strange.
Yes.
I was referencing a old 1960s movie, Doctor Strangelove.
Yes.
Or how I stopped to worry and how I stopped worrying and began to love the bomb. Maybe, or I forget. There's a subtitle of that movie. Yes. It's really bizarro. So anywho, back to my so if there is like a Doctor Strange that knows all future possibilities, does that fact that some other being know what the possibilities are, or knows that there is only one path that I have chosen in the future, does that keep me from being able to choose my path? I don't know the answer to that.
Well, what if we look at it again like an instant, a thing that is outside of time? So everything stops. We're outside of time. Mm. Time does not happen. You're falling. Well, never mind. Let's not say you're falling, but say everything is stopped, and we're looking at kind of Aristotle's definition of motion. There's no motion in that instant. Mm-hmm. But that is not the case forever. As soon as that instant resumes, as soon as time resumes, you still have the ability to have motion. And I'm trying to see where I'm kind of going with this.
You lost me. I don't know where your point is.
Well, in that instant, if in a specific instant outside of time.
No, focus on this. If anyone knows what I'm going to... Let's put it like a really narrow window. So let's say you know everything I'm going to do tomorrow, mm-hmm. in the order in which I'm going to do it. And then at the end of my day, I come home and you say, "Hey, Dad, I knew you were going to do X, Y, and Z, P, D, and Q, and everything else." The fact that you knew I was going to make all those choices, does that keep me from being able to choose those things? Or I have possibly chosen a different path, thereby making you wrong? But if you knew what I was going to do, does that keep my choices from being free will? That's the real question. And why not?
Because then I think that kind of goes back to my allegory of like a time traveler. Because I could have gone into the future asked you what you did that day, and then gone back to the past and then, known what you would have done that day. But I, myself, just knowing those things, going ahead to the future and seeing those things, I would not have made you do those choices. I was not a force acting on your life.
How can, like in my example, how can you know what I'm going to do? How can you know what my choices are going to be if my choices are free to be chosen?
Well, I can't know that.
Well, maybe I should use a different person.
Yeah.
But let's say let's say your mom knows everything I'm going to do.
Mm-hmm.
How is it possible that she knows every choice I'm going to make, and I had a choice to choose otherwise? That's the real question, whether it's God or anybody else. I don't really have a good answer for that.
Well, I mean,
but I suspect that if it's known, especially by the Creator, I suspect that if it's known, then I really didn't have a choice. And I think that would be really boring.
Yeah.
For God. I mean, because he'd be outside of time, so it'd be like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
From the beginning to the end, there'd be no time. There would be no time lapse.
Mm-hmm.
It would have just happened,
yes.
like an instant.
Yes.
Because he's not in time. And if humans or what other creatures you'd say have free will aren't choosing, it'd be really boring to observe.
Yes.
Because it'd be like, it just happened.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that when we make choices and we live in the future, I think the future comes into being when it happens and does not exist until it happens.
Yeah.
But that's
yes.
That's the way I look at it.
Yes.
But it's the whole determinism discussion
mm-hmm.
that the Stoics have, where they're basically hard determinists, where they believe that everything is determined by
mm-hmm. nature,
and it's really fatalism, like
yes.
the fates will decide, and of course the argument against that is, well then why do I do anything? Why bother? Kind of like the skeptics,
mm-hmm.
why would we even bother to try? And
yeah.
and if in their example, the people that criticize the Stoics, their example was, well, if you're ill and you call a doctor, you were either going to get better whether you called the doctor or not. The end result was already determined. So that doesn't seem to make sense, mm-hmm. because if you're ill and the doctor has the cure, and you just say, well, I'm either going to be cured or not, I'm not, then why bother calling a doctor? Mm-hmm. Well, then you're going to die, and but then I guess their argument would be, well, then I decided not to do that, and I was determined not to do it, and so then I died.
Yes.
But the whole idea of a human being able to choose between mm-hmm. two options is antithetical to fate or determinism.
Yes.
And so it's almost like in a common sense scenario, you say, well, I have these choices and I can choose for good or for ill. And if I choose to do nothing, I've still made a choice.
Yes.
To paraphrase Rush.
Mm-hmm. They really do kind of a terrible job, I think, at kind of framing freedom within determinism, because the Stoics still believe that even though there was determinism, human beings still had responsibility and they still had the ability to choose to do things.
Right.
And they explained it by the random swerving of atoms.
Yeah, by chance.
Yes.
So that there's a long line of thought that there's a certain and then it's really philosophers that believed in this really grabbed onto quantum theory, because mm-hmm. quantum theory is where you couldn't predict how these little quarks or whatever would turn up in the experiments and stuff, and they kind of alluded to a certain level of chance somehow imbuing a weakness in determinism, because mm-hmm. if there is chance, then not everything can be determined. And they grasp on that to say, well, then that proves that there's some sort of element of free will, but it just means that there's just a different causation for it. It doesn't mean that you're an independent actor if it's chance. I mean, mm-hmm. because like a roll of the dice or true chance or luck doesn't really give you free will any more than physical determination does. So it's like, well, that's just a different physical phenomenon or just a random effect. I'm not choosing this. It's just kind of like
it just happened
for
no good reason.
I think it's an interesting theory to defeat total determinism is that how can you have chance and have determinism, but it doesn't necessarily support free will.
Yeah.
Because free will is that you're an independent actor outside of physical forces that don't determine the outcome.
Yes.
And it's an interesting discussion, the determinism, especially when you get into like behavioral psychology and the argument for determinism in today's modern world is that if you really, really knew the complexity of the human brain and you could look at all the inputs of that brain from birth to the present time, you would be able to determine what that person would do given a certain environmental input.
Yeah.
Of course, it's not you're not able to know that currently. But what if you had a supercomputer that was able to input all of the same things that human knew? Would that be able to be known? If it's able to be known, then maybe it's just a really complex automaton. Similar to like Data in Star Trek Next Generation or whatever, where he's an android. Of course, they make the argument in that show that he has free will and he's human. I'm doing air quotes, human, even though he's a machine. But really, they almost kind of support the idea that humans are just very, very complex machines. But so that it's an interesting. Because there are some things that are determined physically.
Yes.
Involuntary reflexes. If I bump my knee in a certain way with a little rubber mallet, my foot's going to kick up. Well, I didn't choose to do that. So there's a certain level of that we all recognize and expect, like a fight or flight response. But we also believe, most everybody believes, that we have a certain intellect that is beyond those physical limitations.
Yes.
So that we can make these choices. And so that's the question of what is determined, what's the level of it. I kind of went on a rant there.
Yeah.
But I still have an issue, and I can't quite figure out the depth of my issue with the idea of God knowing what I'm going to choose. But then on the other hand, I kind of made an argument against it tonight, which is just because he knows it doesn't mean I didn't have a choice to choose what I did. He just knows it.
That's kind of where I think, because I think to say that God doesn't know everything is kind of minimize God in a way, because I think that's one of the things that makes him God. Because if he doesn't know everything, then why is he our standard for what is right and wrong?
Well, I wouldn't. My premise of it is that he does not. He knows everything that is to be known.
Yes.
But those things didn't exist, so he can't. It's not knowable.
Yeah, but I think any amount of lack of knowledge on God's part would make him less God.
Huh.
And so I think that's just one of the things that makes God required to be God, is that he has to know everything.
Why is that?
Well, because then otherwise, it's kind of like what I said, because if he's not infinitely knowledgeable, if he doesn't know everything, then he can't really be our guiding force, right? I don't think he's like, I say guiding force not to mean he's guiding our actions, but I think
why not? I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
But in that he's a guiding force in that we strive to be with him in a way. Kind of do as like I would say that the Ten Commandments are a very simple way of looking at it, but to do the right thing, and the right thing kind of comes, I think, from God. Our inherent conscience and our inherent knowledge of like natural law of what is right and wrong. I think that is given to us by God, and so to say that God doesn't know everything, then it kind of devolves the whole idea of natural law, and because I think natural law, for it to be right, it has to be given to us by somebody who knows everything that is right and everything that is wrong. And so to have this natural law, to say that he doesn't know everything would to minimize that, I think.
Interesting. I don't think it's necessarily true that it devalues those kind of concepts of natural law or the value of God, just to say he doesn't know what has not been created by his hand yet. Essentially, I mean, he set this in motion and created everything, and everything he's created may create other things within that world, like children or causes or effects or whatever. But the idea that he knows the future and all future choices and decisions also causes me a little bit of concern, because he would then know there are some people that have chosen just about every evil choice they could make.
Yes.
And there's some people in history that are like that. And I'm sure there'll be some people in the future that will do that. And so then the question would be, well, why didn't he just kind of take them out when they're infants? Once he knows that, once he knows they're going to make every wrong decision going forward, shouldn't he just stop it? Because he knows it, right? And your theory, he knows every decision they're going to make in the future. Why let that happen?
Well, we have to have a framework for what is right and what is wrong.
Yeah, but you already know.
But if everybody does everything that is right, that takes away our ability to be with him, right? Because that's my understanding of the end goal of everything, is to be with God in heaven. Mm. And so to just get rid of all of the people that he knows won't be with him, devalues us of our own choice to actively choose to be with him.
I wasn't making the argument that everybody who isn't going to make the cut shouldn't live.
Well, why not?
I'm talking about those few. Well, I'll get to that in a minute. Those few that would choose everything wrong. Mm-hmm. Why bother, man?
That's their choice.
No, why does he bother with it? Why doesn't he just go and they're gone?
Well, because they still have to make those choices.
But he already knows it. Right?
But they still have the ability to make those choices.
I know they have ability, and they've chosen to do that. Yes. They've chosen every bad choice in their life.
Well, that's one of our.
So why does he even let that happen?
Well, that's one of our things that can't be taken away from us, is our free will and our intellect. And
why?
Because it just is, right? Because no matter in what situation we are in, we still have a choice. That is our free will. They kind of mentioned it here that kind of in determinism, even the decision to not do anything, that is a decision. And so I think in any situation, we always have a choice.
I get that.
Yes.
So let's say that's all true.
Yes.
God knows it. Mm-hmm. And God knows every choice you're going to make.
Yes.
And let's say from this day forward, you have chosen, or you will choose, every evil thing you could possibly choose until the day you die.
Yes.
And you're going to go to hell. Why wouldn't God tonight just say, you know what? I'm just not going to do it. Let's just end him tomorrow. Because every choice he's going to make is going to be a terrible one. I just send him to hell today. And why would he make everyone else suffer through that when he knows already this is a bad seed? Mm-hmm. Or let's use your argument. Well, what about those? Let's say I don't even know what the numbers would be, of course. But let's say it's 50-50. But when we get done with this life, half of us go up, half of us go down. Right? Half of us go to heaven, half goes to hell. But if he knows all the future, and he knows all the choices we're going to make,
yes,
isn't really this kind of like a simulation? So why doesn't he just, instead of having us live through that, why doesn't he just sort us out now?
Well, because we have an impact on others.
Yeah, but he knows all the impacts on everybody else.
Yes.
Because he knows the future. He knows what everybody has already done.
Yes.
Why doesn't he just,
well, then
the half that have done the good thing already, you just go to heaven. Well, then, and the other half that have done the below 50%, to go to hell. And they don't have to experience any of it.
Well, then if he does that, because we are within time.
Right.
And so if he gets rid of all these evil people.
I'd say he gets rid of all of us.
Yes. Yes.
He just ends life for everybody that are living now and will live in the future. Why doesn't he just go and just say, you're not going to even live?
Yeah, let me talk.
Here's all the souls that go there. Here's all the souls
I understand.
There.
Let me
you understand the scenario?
Yes,
okay.
I understand the scenario. Because those people that are going to hell might still affect those people who are going to heaven, right, at the end of things, right? And if we take everything out now, right, because say I'm going to hell, and in this particular instance, I've done a lot of bad things, I'm going to go to hell, but it's only in the future that something changes. I meet a person who's going to hell, and by some scenario, my interaction with them changes my path in order to go to heaven. But if we were all to just go right now, right, I'm already on the path to hell. I would go to hell.
I think you're misunderstanding the scenario. So all the things have already happened.
Yes.
All the things have already happened, and actually they haven't happened, but he knows they're going to happen, right? He knows all those things are going to happen before you're born. So all the people are going to be born 300 years from now. He already knows what their lives are going to be. They've already lived their lives according to him because he's outside of time. So all those things have already happened. So why bother? Why don't you just sort it? Why don't you just create those souls, throw half of them in this basket, half of them in that basket, and not even have the life? Why bother? If you already know it as God, aren't you just watching reruns? Because you've already seen it. You already known it. Because it's already happened for you. And it's never going to change. It's the same show. There's no George Lucas coming back and having a new version of Star Wars with like reanimation stuff. It's the same show. It's one show. There are no other shows. There's no spin-off series. There's no nothing. It is one show from beginning to end, and it doesn't change because you already know what they've all done.
Mm-hmm. Well, then I think then we're still stuck in the reference of time, because that
has there's really no relevance.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Because you're saying he's looking back at everything, but he's not. He's not looking back, and he's not looking forward to the future, and he's not looking back to the past.
Yeah, I know that.
Yes.
It's just now to him.
Yes.
It's all now.
Yes.
And so why bother?
Well, because we have to earn that.
Earn what?
Earn wherever we're going.
He's already known what we're going to do. Why even let us do it?
Because we have to. Because we have to.
I think we both have to think a little bit longer on this one. Yes. Because I just don't. I can't. You're going to have to help me work this out, because I can't figure out why it makes sense that he knows the choices I'm going to make in the future, which would allow me to have a choice. But I guess in theory he can know it. But then I'm like, why is he even letting it play out?
Yes. I think it's about time we stopped having this discussion. I think half of the podcast has been spent on this one topic. So,
well, I can talk about any particular subject, unlimited amount of time.
I know you can.
Yeah, and this was reminding me of why my fellow students hated me when I was in my metaphysics class, because I had a professor that was what's called a soft determinism. So a soft determinist. He literally believed that you could have a certain level of determinism, but there's some sort of fine veneer, whether it's not chance. He had a reason to believe that there was somehow, basically, we were determined to have free will. Mm-hmm. So in that determinism, the complexity created free will. And so he would make the argument, but of course you could always argue, well, that is just our imagining free will, when really there are additional physical factors that are at play, which just causes us to believe we have free will.
Yes.
But anyway, we went round and round and round. The rest of the students hated me because every class, I would end. He would always want to have the last word, but then he'd say, "Okay, Mark, you can say one last thing." I'd say one last thing, it would drive him crazy. So then the next week he'd come back and he says, "Before we get on to the next topic, I want to address something that Mr. Bishop said last time." And the students would audibly groan. And I was too stubborn to let it go. And I just thought he was abusing his position, trying to convince us that he was right. It's like, well, why don't you go on to the next subject, man? Just let it go. Mm-hmm. And so he was probably thinking the same thing about me.
Yes.
I don't know. I paid for it, so. Anywho.
All right.
So there's that. So we can talk about it again next week.
All right.
Give it some more thought. Maybe you can convince me.
Mm-hmm. I'll try.
God does not know the future.
I think he does. Well, this has been Unlimited Opinions. I've been Adam Bishop.
And I am still Mark Bishop.
I'm glad you're still doing that. So did all the other students actually hate you?
I wasn't very likable anyway. So it wasn't a big a leap in that particular class.
I can
it was
imagine.
a little difficult to get along with.
All right.